Good morning, El Paso. Welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where we share the fun of the big questions with you. My name is Dr. Kim Diaz, and I'm a philosopher here at EPCC.
And my name is Jules Simon, and I'm a philosopher at the University of Texas, El Paso.
And we're so excited today because we get to have the opportunity to speak with Alexis Anderson. She is an assistant professor and district-wide coordinator in dance at El Paso Community College. She is a Corpus Christi native who received her B.F.A and M.F.A from Sam Houston State University. She was a company member and choreographer with Urban Souls Dance Company for 5 seasons before moving to El Paso. She was featured choreographer in Elijah Alhadji Gibson premiere of The Black Card. She has performed at Vanderbilt University Theater, the Alvin Ailey Theater, the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and Jacob's Pillow. Recently, she produced a repertoire for Urban Schools Dance Company and was a concert adjudicator for the Bailando International Dance Festival at Texas A&M University-Corpus Christi. Thank you for making time to be with us today.
I appreciate it.
I have a lot of questions to ask you.
Yes.
I guess, so we've been talking about the fronteras, the borders between philosophy, other disciplines, and beauty and philosophy. We like to talk a lot about these ideas, right? You dance, and it's like we've interviewed other people, like, for instance, Jay Stratton from UTEP in theater, and there's so many aspects of beauty that you deal with, and at the same time, not all dance is beautiful. So, and not all theater is beautiful. Like when they deal with tragedy, for instance, how can they see the beauty in tragedy? But it's still, you deal with beauty. You have to think about beauty. So what do you think about beauty?
I think beauty is very personal. It's very subjective and relative to the experience. So what you may perceive beauty one day may change in the next 5 years. It may change in the next few months, depending on your experience. And a lot of the times in the arts, we're constantly trying to understand why we feel how we feel. And even in those dystopian arts where the purpose may be catharsism and trying to reach catharsism, and then finding that same common ground in the dystopian could be seen as beauty, that it's a shared conversation. And so I do appreciate the different views of beauty. And so, like I always say in my dance appreciation classes, it's important to know when we're being subjective, when we're being objective, and how we gather interpretation, because all of those shape how we perceive art.
What is catharsis?
Catharsism, the best way of explaining it is like a teenager. So a teenager is mad at their mom or dad and they can't say anything. And so instead of saying anything, they take the pillow and they scream, ah! That's the catharsism. And so finding a way to release any type of trauma or feelings or moods through a movement. So or even it can be more discursive through language, but most of the time it happens through presentational, which is movement.
So related to this question about what is beauty, as a dancer, do you when you're preparing to do a piece, an interpretation of some kind of song or a program, do you have in your mind or in your consciousness that I want this to be a beautiful sort of presentation or something like that, or is there something else going on, right?
That's a good
is there a model of a beautiful way that your dance will unfold, or the moments to it? Does beauty work that way for you or something?
That's what I was thinking about it, and I'm glad you asked that question, because now I'm deeply reflecting, where in the past it was about the end result, but now as an artist, I'm more about the journey inside of it. And so the journey, even though the interpretation may not come off as the initial interpretation, it's more of the process that enhance or just is the beautiful part of choreography or part of dance. And so I don't look at the end result anymore, because a lot of the times that's expectations, and my grandma will always say expectations are the child of pride and the stepchild of fear. To have goals and not expectations, and just enjoying the process. So I think the process is more beautiful versus the ending result, because then just acknowledging the process or actively listening to the process can create more ideas and concepts that you may overlook trying to worry about the end goal. So
yeah, so this is interesting. So as opposed to making a judgment about, say, oh, I as you see some dance moves or a piece of an interpretive dance set of choreographed or organized movements, and you can have this impression that was beautiful, right? That kind of strikes the spectator as beautiful. But as a dancer, or even perhaps more as a choreographer, is there like a plan of beauty that you want to kind of get going so that you have some sort of idea about it, that it's going to look in a certain way, and then you can say, oh, that's unfolding really well, or maybe the function is really a component of that. I'm not exactly sure how I want to get to the question of it, right? But you're talking about the process of being engaged in it, but how does that relate to how that judgment about something being beautiful?
I'm going to interrupt. For me, so much of it is the authenticity of the person's expression.
right.
Even if they hit all the notes, right, or even if their body moves through space perfectly, if to me what you were talking about, this feeling, the catharsis, if it's authentic, to me that's more beautiful. I guess it's because of the humanity.
Right.
We can connect. The audience feels, the dancer expresses,
Right.
but the connects with the audience, and that's I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
You two are dancers. I'm like standing at the outside. I'm clearly in the audience.
No, and again, yeah, there's different perceptions of beauty, so that's really complicated. But a lot of the times, choreography is like research, and so when a student or even a choreographer instructor try to gain choreography, it's the same process of having like conceptual theories and then theoretical framework, but it's just more explored with body language. And so it's similar to research, where we're constantly getting conceptual frameworks of motifs or how what we're experiencing in the moment, and also trying to gather the theory of how we're going to articulate that for the audience to understand, or maybe even rebel, and maybe the audience don't have to understand it, and that's the purpose of the dance, to encourage a really, really deep sense making or deep process of trying to really get to the root of understanding. And so it's just all up in the air, but again, that's what makes it beautiful, because it's not cookie cutter to the person next to you. So it's all very subjective, which is great.
Yeah, so I teach phenomenology, and in philosophy, phenomenology is that sort of discipline that focuses on what's subjective.
Right.
It's kind of a subjective expression. It's the wheelhouse of a phenomenologist, right? So this is really interesting to me. So one of the remarks that I heard you make a few minutes ago was that one of your goals in choreographing a piece is to bring out the variety of different kinds of human expressions. And emotions. Does that capture, I guess, what we're getting at, this question of what's beautiful when you see this authentic expression or something that a dancer is matched with the music that's being used for the dance, right? Is the matching of the music somehow with the body movement? Is that kind of matching, corresponding thing working?
It can.
Is that what might be the beauty part?
It can. I always tell my students that when it comes to dance and music, we're a relationship, but we can stand on our own. And so a lot of the elements inside of dance, where it should stand without the music, but the music can support it. And so the motifs, how we address point A to point B, is really how the choreographer has to problem solve. Especially, I don't know if y'all heard of like Suzanne Langer.
No.
She has, the symbolism is key, and the idea of like discursive symbols versus presentational symbols. So if I do this presentational symbol, I'm doing it, but it can be perceived as 2 or V or piece, depending on the context and who's shaping that work. And so, beauty, again, is so subjective, but to me, I love it when it's authentic. And so that's my whole like artistic philosophy when perceiving art. When it comes from a real deep-rooted experience, I tend to enjoy it or like it. So where some people just want to escape, and that's great too, where they like the musicals and whimsical things that are like, oh, more on the escapism side. Some people like the postmodern aspect and like rebelling and works that about protest and saying, having a voice and more emancipatory. But again, it just depends on the person's artistic view and how they view art.
I got like cascading questions, I guess. So that's interesting. So in dance, are there like conventional ways to interpret a certain piece of music or something like that? And that from your perspective, a postmodern, say, take on that would be something that interrupts the conventional interpretation, or something that highlights a particular expression of that dancer or something?
Well, when it comes
What's the resistance part? What's the rebelling part?
May I? Because so I know very little. I know, for instance, to me, classical is ballet. That's what I, Western. And then modern, I think of Martha Graham. But then what is postmodern? How can you be more of a rebel than Martha Graham was to me? But
there is a group of people that were big rebels. They rebel, especially when you get into like Twyla Tharp, David Gordon. I remember telling my students where I tell them the difference between subjective and objective, and like to how we have to tell the difference. So I tell them, I think what David Gordon does is genius. However, it's not my perceived beauty of art. And so subjectively, I wouldn't pay a lot of money to see a person stand up for 30 minutes in a chair, but I do appreciate it, because if I had to stand there for 30 minutes in a chair, I would be anxious and just standing up. But it's not the type of art I would like to pay for. And that's okay, because there's always people that are there to pay for it. And so that postmodern definitely was a rebel era. There's a lot of more people that are part of that era, like Jose Limon. There's just a big group of people that are part of that postmodern that they were like, yep, we're rebelling against the modern, the foundational modern structures, which actually rebelled against the ballet. So it's like a never-ending, I guess you can say it's more about like relevancy versus like being like, oh, let's adopt this, which, mind you, we're still doing Martha Graham works today, but it's also that constructing, deconstructing, analyzing to construct and deconstruct more. So it's that conversation of constant sense making that overloops over and over and over again.
I want to take this, what we've talked about, and having our audience in mind, right? you can't help but to think about beauty because you work with your body and think, you always have an audience, right? So as teachers, I can't help but to always have my students in mind. Mm-hmm. And so then why is it important for the average person to think about beauty?
I think that acknowledging beauty in a different perspective allows us to access a level of emotional intelligence that we never accessed before. And so it's that idea of like role reversal, putting yourself in someone's shoes. So when you're watching that art or viewing that art, and whether you like it or not, there's always a reason. And so getting to dive deep inside of yourself to understand, why don't I like this piece? Why do I like this view of art? Why do I perceive this as beautiful? And the next person perceives that piece as beautiful and I don't. And so it's acknowledging that we all have our own subjective experiences and how we perceive beauty differently amongst something that is objective, like one dance moves. One person may have a positive experience or more of a whole experience from it versus another person may have a negative experience from it. It may be the same thing, but they both had different views. And so I think this theory is called Phenomenology of Others, John Dewey, where he talks about levels of relationships and how we can look at one view of art differently based on our aesthetic experiences.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you, I want to talk more about this. It seems to me, I could be wrong, but a lot of us are afraid to feel. We busy ourselves with the phone or shopping or eating or work or what have you, but it's uncomfortable. So, and you do the opposite. You dive deep in there. Mm-hmm. How do you do it to not pull away when the strong emotions come in and instead lean into them to find the substance of your work, right? Mm-hmm. So I think most of us are afraid of, oh yeah, no, that feels uncomfortable, let me not have that conversation. Or what is there in that well of emotions that it's actually worth going in there for? Mm-hmm. What do you have techniques that you can share with us?
Not necessarily techniques, more of like a lived experience where in grad school I did my research with psychodrama, incorporating psychodrama in the choreographic process. And in the midst of researching psychodrama, Jacob Levy Moreno, the person that created it, he talked about being adequate and how adequacy is brilliant. And so being vulnerable, being yourself, being human is the brilliant part. And the minute that we stop ourselves from being brilliant is when we're trying something that is not authentic to us or we don't do it at all. And so allowing ourselves to be present in a moment, even if it's messy, that is the beauty inside of it. So it's either a learned lesson or something that you created or constructed out of something that has already been deconstructed.
Mm-hmm.
Can I, this is just a fascinating conversation, so thank you for joining us this morning, Alexis. Part of phenomenology as well, because I hear, lived experience and all that kind of stuff, right? But part of it is this also a really super important part, because we've been focusing on the individual and their expression and their vulnerabilities or their being present in the moment. But a big part of, one of the ways I focus in phenomenology is this phenomenon of intersubjectivity. Mm-hmm. So in that those authentic expressive movements that you kind of want to elicit or promote or lean into in dancing, right? Is there also some way that you approach the dance that incorporates other people, that brings them into the authentic movement, besides just their judgmental, because it's an embodied experience, right? And I go to a concert, and I go with Kim to a concert, and sometimes we get up and dance in the aisle, right? And is that something also that you want to, you know, as part of the affecting the other subjects, the audience, the viewers, or even your dance partner, you want that to pass along that or something like that? The whole phenomenon of dance as a kind of social movement,
Right.
I guess is what I want to get at.
Yeah, and actually a lot of people don't know that dance, we have our own not music score, we have our own score. Like music have like the half note, full note. We have our own score called law bond movement analysis.
Oh.
And so law bond movement analysis is basically talking about fundamental ways the body moves. And there are articles that talk about how we perceive movement and how it correlates with the discursive symbols in our lived experiences. And so, for example, in the effort qualities, it talks about attention to space, and so direct and indirect, and how we establish space with our eyes, not just with our bodies. So going on in a plane where we don't acknowledge another person, so we have our bubble, versus if you turn towards each other and you're in a close vicinity, you're acknowledging space. And so there's a lot of overlap that plays inside of how law bond movement analysis, on top of lived experiences, on top of the scores, the choreographic scores or improvisational scores that are embedded, again, like research different conceptual and theoretical frameworks to bring together to form the art and why you're doing the art, or even how. So the why or the how. So yeah.
Well, that was a really complex thing. I'm sure our audience probably could have had trouble following that. You know, I was just kind of having a little trouble following it, but that's
I think that's
great.
awesome.
And our students do that all the time. So they are constantly thinking about ways of constructing, deconstructing, how to turn one simple gesture into a whole different phrase of movement or a whole meaningful phrase, or even if it's avant-garde and it has like abstract meaning. So they take this one idea and turn it into different ideas. And so I noticed that, like, with more practice, the students get very confident, and they are confident in taking risk, which is what we do as artists all the time. We take risks. We don't know if our message is going to reach the person. It may not. But at the end of the day, our job as an artist is to make people feel. So if the person is mad by the art or don't like the art or like it, then we did our job. So.
Yeah, the job of the dancer or the choreographer is to help people express their feelings, or to come to an awareness of their feelings. That's kind of getting at something that Kim was, I think, the deep feelings that we don't want to get at. Is there something going on there? And this is related to the second major part of our question stream, like what is aesthetics? You know, what is our lived body experience with the world? And part of that's that emotional dimension, right? That a lot of us don't want to go to.
Definitely.
Right? So is that what you're getting at?
Yes, that emotional level, but again, with a lived experience, it can be beautiful or it can be messy, because in those lived experiences, it's not necessarily acknowledging the person coming in and possibly having a traumatized experience to that art. And so it's there's not one cookie cutter way. Then even the dancer, if you're a choreographer and you're giving this blueprint to the dancer, they're decorating their blueprint, your blueprint, how they see fit. And so it's this ongoing
interpretation, right?
Ongoing, interpretation, and what might be relevant now may not be relevant next year, may not be relevant in 10 years,
right?
It may be more relevant in 10 years. And so there's still that gray area, but it's like I say it's like an organized chaos. Where it's like, if you look from it from a perceiving view, there's a structure to it, but in the moment, it's not as much as structured, or not a set of protocols that you have to follow from like point A to point B. You might have to start at Z, you might start at T, you might start at A and then end up at P, and then go back to A to solve for Z. And so it's this constant just way of navigating new art or your perceived art, perceived aesthetic.
I think one of a philosophical question that I've always had, and this is what keeps philosophers in business, right? Why do humans dance? You know, like why?
That's pretty fundamental.
No,
Yeah,
that's,
right?
That's us. Like,
What
as-
drives us to dance?
I feel like our emotions drive us to dance, to be quite honest, and not just emotions, but again, being inspired. It draws us to move our bodies because, like, I know people are like, I'm not a dancer, but we move all the time from when we walk, when we're sitting in a chair, when we're out and about in Walmart. I love people watching. I tell my dance appreciation students, people watch at grocery stores and malls and parks. It's gold because a lot of the movements are so diverse from one person to the next that you're able to draw concepts from those simple movements at a grocery store or those movements of children. Children will do all the movements in like 5 minutes and you can be inspired by that. And so it's just so many ways of like perceiving like arts and aesthetic, and I can go on and on and on and on about it, but
yeah. One of the things I think, this is just kind of a quibble on my part, perhaps, but I think one of the things that attracted Kim to me was that when we would go shopping together and hear the music in the background, I would grab her and dance in the grocery aisles with her. You know,
I
this
love
is
that.
one of my favorite songs. Come on, let's dance a little bit.
Oh, I love that. I wish more people would do that.
Yeah, in the kitchen with the cat or whatever, right?
Yeah, we dance with our dog.
Well, music obviously is, yeah, you know, to me, those are questions like, how come certain music affects us in a certain way, and in a way that it just brings you down emotionally, and some other music is so peppy or whatever, right, that makes you want to get up and dance. What is it, you know, what is it about the sound, the vibration? I don't know, right? I guess it's like food, right? Like after I eat a big bowl of spaghetti, all I feel like doing is sitting down, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, and then it's also interesting with kids, right? Little kids are wiggle bottoms and they just can't sit still.
No.
And then what happens? Then, you know, you reach a certain age and we don't.
Right, and especially children, they don't have those expectations established, so they're willing to try anything and do anything. And so, like, for example, if I was to teach like 5 to 6 year olds and tell them to like reach, and they will like reach and explore because they're still trying to figure out life versus those imposed like and I always say to my dance appreciation, because they get so nervous taking risks with movements, because we're taught to a lot with like discursive and like words, and so movement is very vulnerable. And so taking a risk with movement, especially as like teenagers and adults, is a scary space because you're putting yourself out there unapologetically, and a lot of people fear being wrong inside of their bodies. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the time children are not afraid of taking that risk and being wrong and like just figuring it out through the moments. And so in the arts, it's definitely driven by like nostalgic, like being nostalgic, and also tapping into that inner child and seeing like, why do I feel the way I feel? Why is it hard for me to produce this work? Why is this moment so vulnerable for me? Why is this moment uplifting for me? And so subjectively, I always check into my inner child, and that helps me. But again, there's multiple ways that artists grabs their information or perceives their information, and it's just, yeah, it's all open-ended, which makes it hard to think about or start a concept. But the rewarding part is when someone understands or feels with that concept that you are trying to present and they're inspired by it. It's the best feeling in the world.
Well, this is brilliant. I hope this finds a way into your PhD work, you know. Because I work, as I told you, in phenomenology, and with this one philosopher named Heidegger, and he has this book on origin of the work of art, right? And I just caught this one remark you just said that, and maybe I misheard you, but let me say it back and see if I heard you correctly. And so, is it that the art or the dance draws in somebody to the piece or the music? The art itself draws us in.
Yeah,
somehow.
It is the art. I think the art, not just the art, but also how a person perceives that art. Because, yeah, it all comes down to how a person perceives it, and it's based off their own lived experiences. It's like an Easter egg basket, and everybody's Easter egg basket is different, but everyone is carrying their concepts inside of that Easter egg basket to address how to perceive or how to shape their interpretation. Some people want that interpretation to be the shiny finishing product at the end, but someone like me, it's more about the process and how I'm utilizing the tools inside of the bag to reach to point B.
Yeah, and Kim's going to use the tools differently because her tools are different, right? So it is a part of individual perception too, and how I'm being called by this art. I guess we're pretty deep into it now, and there is this kind of play between my own individual expression, but also the art form itself, the dance, and then multiple people doing it.
Yes. I would like to go there.
Okay.
Outside off the stage, right? Off the stage, as you deal with people, as you deal with people who are not dancers, what advice do you have for the rest of us on how to be graceful?
That's a hard question.
When the emotions get uncomfortable.
I believe
this is a question. How would a dancer answer that question, right?
Because, right, you're dealing with these emotions that are not always pretty,
right?
But with grace. So how do you take that off the stage and transfer that to, what advice do you have for the rest of us?
I feel like a lot of the times we try to separate ourselves from art and from literature, but we're actually one and the same. And so as far as like how I perceive movement and what I think about art, I'm always not just initially like just going for it. I'm allowing myself to actively listen around me, and so I do observe people's body language the most, and a lot of, again, going back to the idea like hermeneutics, right? Like we're always analyzing text, words, language, dialect, but there's also another layer of body movement inside of that. And so there is a perceived notion of the body, and there's the saying, the body never lies, words do. And so trying to understand basically what the purpose of our interpretation and what we want it to be, the purpose of how we want to inspire others, because I do believe artists have a social responsibility to society, whether it's for good or for bad, where you see art that's like inspiring and art that's like there to disrupt, and they have a purpose inside of it. And so that body language inside of specifically dance and how we perceive it is along the realm of like hermeneutics and the interpretation and understanding the phenomenon of how we're addressing my view of anger versus someone else's view of anger. So it's all, again, just broad and different, but beautiful at the same time.
So pay attention, pay deeper attention.
Yeah, actively listening, and a lot of emotional intelligence go into that too, because we're always caught up on listening to words where we'll miss people's body language. And I notice it subjectively. I noticed it a lot more with the pandemic happening, where people were more open with interacting and being involved with the body, but now there's a distance from people that they can have a conversation to you, but their chest is closed off and reserved. hinting at fear and hinting at uncomfortableness. And so trying to understand, why is that person uncomfortable to the other person, and what experiences got them to that point to feel uncomfortable with speaking with another human being. And so, yeah, the body language aspect.
So it's so subtle, right? Because
Very.
if the right, yeah, it's not like I can go in front of their face and talk to them, right? Because they're already telling me with their body language, I'm uncomfortable. So I just take it from there, right?
Right. And exposing, always tell people to expose yourself to different art that's outside of what you know. When I first went to Sam Houston State, I was exposed to one type of art. And so going there, my view of art broadened to the point where I got interested in catharsism inside of dance. And so that catharsism was really inspired by this piece from Bill T. Jones called Still/Here, which is basically a narrative and an oral history of people that are dealing with like illnesses and the fact that they're gonna die. And so his art still talking about how they're about to die, but their movement is here. So if you say, do the Jackie or do the Arnold, and so this movement and this motif, that Arnold is there forever, even though Arnold is not there in the body, his legacy is still here. And so encouraging those type of like narratives when it comes to like, again, just like research, oral history, art-based history, understanding why you're trying to interpret what you interpret is a part of the main aspect of who we are as artists. And that's why if you get 5 artists in the room together, our artistic statements are going to be drastically different from the next person.
Mm.
Yeah, just like philosophers.
Yes.
And they're all wrong. Except me.
I'm just listening here to your talk. It's fascinating. So part of it is understanding one's embodied place in the world as well, you know, and that's the nuance you mentioned. But it's but what I'm also hearing you say is there are really important relational aspects in learning dance and learning how to interpret dance and expressing oneself through dance, right? And so these relational aspects then give us a richer and deeper understanding of not only my place in the world, but also, I can't remember the name of the person you were referring to at the
I just said a random person's name.
Yeah, okay.
But if you watch it, it's really good.
The point there is understanding then also the historical influence that person had.
Right.
That gets carried on even in their absence. So it's not just the presence of, but it's the absence of the ongoing influence of these relations.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating.
Especially legacy, like even though Shakespeare is not here, we're still saying to be to not to be. That's the question. We're still understanding more soliloquies because of that one soliloquy moment. And so when you look at theater and when the audience member sees a person step out to engage the dialogue towards the audience that the other people inside are not aware of, that concept is still like being influenced today, even though it was Shakespeare is not alive, and but we're still saying to be or not to be, or we're still seeing Petitpot's Nutcracker. You're still viewing Alvin Ailey's art of Revelations, and so that legacy is definitely important. Another layer, the peeling onion, as you can say, of the arts and why we do what we do. And so,
I wanted to talk about the power of art to heal. And is it because it goes into the emotions and the catharsis?
Yes.
Because there is art therapy, you know, so it is bona fide, certified, insurance pay for it, right? Art is used as therapy, and how does that happen?
I think in the arts we're very smart about knowing when there's a void. And so, for example, during the pandemic, a lot of people were trapped at home, which was a lot of artists' opportunity to provide more art for people to dance or take a free class on YouTube or to enroll in a hybrid dance course to cathartically release those emotions of feeling trapped and overwhelmed and living in fear of a disease that we didn't know about at the time. And so artists were really good about perceiving when there's a void. And so, for example, in my dance appreciation, I notice a lot of students are very reluctant to take risks with their bodies. So if you tell them to try a turn or a spin or to reach a certain way, there's this timidness because it's like, am I doing this correct? But my correct might not be the same as another person's correct because from a quant size side of point, like physics is different. Like a tall person, how they address like movement is going to be different from a person that's a little bit shorter. But at the same time, acknowledging those lived experiences on top of that is vastly different from each artist.
Why is it important to release the emotions? So if I have fear, like you were talking about earlier during the pandemic, you have all this fear of this. Okay, it's one thing to feel the emotion, but if it's in there, if the fear is in there and it doesn't express itself, or if the anger is in there and it doesn't express itself, or love, whatever, right? Whatever emotion I have, why is it important for us to express it, to let it out?
If we don't let it out, as far as our body language, it will be let out some way or somehow. A lot of people overlook the fact that trauma and stress triggers illnesses. And so those illnesses will happen, and it will take a toll on your body, your mind, your spirit. And so it is very crucial to have a sense of release, especially with the body, which a lot of times people don't realize that we don't do. So for example, a person may have a hard situation with like people being touched from a past traumatic experience, and they're not thinking about it, but then a person touches them by accident, and then that trauma happens, and that thought process is like already alarming, more like PTSD. And so it's important to channel those emotions and, I guess you can say, grieve, finding a way to let the body grieve on top of the mind, because if not, it will manifest into other things. And I know that from personal experience. And so trying to be the person of like, I'm fine, everything is awesome, but then holding those negative like feelings that served me no purpose. And it would have been ideal for me to cathartically let it go, but it took me a while, and then it manifested into illness. But then that allowed it to, I had to really let it go. And so then I was lucky to turn to art, and where art can help me channel that and release that energy, the catharsis part.
Okay, so we're clearly in the realm of aesthetics.
Right.
Can I
I just want to say something, but don't forget just the importance, right? Because it's like, it's not just about beauty. It's sometimes it can be a matter of life and death and the quality of life that we enjoy.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to take a bit of a, and this is off our list of questions here, but, we've been dancing on the mountaintops with a lot of very high-level conceptual dialogue on, what's the theory of art and how does art work, and what's the relevance of it, and its therapeutic, its value, and all that kind of stuff. But aesthetically, as a dancer, there's an everydayness to your art.
Yes.
And it's something I'm guessing you have to work at.
Yes.
I mean, you have to practice it. It's kind of like playing the violin. If you don't play every day, or you play an instrument, you lose your you lose your touch, or you lose your ear. And similarly, I guess with dance, maybe you could share with us some of that. You mentioned briefly that you had to have deal with some kind of sickness or.
Yeah.
But like, what is your daily engagement with your art, with your dance, and the kind of work you have to put in? And this is related to a question that is on our list, which has to do with your dance appreciation class.
Yes.
But because your work as an artist and your excellence as a dancer comes about through a lot of hard work, I imagine.
Oh, for sure. And a lot of trial and error. A lot of the times we forget that in the humanities we're not much different than a scientist in a lab, where we're constantly like having a hypothesis and then like, oh, that doesn't work, and then like figuring it out, and it's like trial, error, trial, error, trial, error.
Yeah.
And so in that, and just like trying to like for example, gaining technique and learning that pirouette, but also how to remain composed on the stage when you're nervous and still articulate the message, how to and keep those phrase and movements intact, but at the same time articulating the feeling towards the audience, or even understanding your relationship of where you are in space, because dancing on stage in a black box proscenium is different than dancing in a more immersed park where you can see eyes, you can see natural elements being affected, and so they're also vastly just different. And like I understand why people get so confused with the arts, because they're like, oh, is it one cookie cutter thing or a cookie cutter way? And it really isn't. And so that's what again makes it beautiful, because there's so many broad ideas and options that it's up to us as the dancer or the choreographer to narrow down what tool best helps us. And so yeah, I do appreciate that about the arts, that there's options, or what's my option today may not be my option that I want to use tomorrow. So
yeah, along those lines, then I want to turn to that question, because you're a choreographer too. You're not just a dancer, but you direct dancing, right? And you're also directing the learning of dancing. And so what kind of work do you put into your dance appreciation class? I mean, how do you get students to appreciate, what you've taken many, many years to develop, as a not only aspirational, but someone who's engaged with your art in such a deep and meaningful way? How do you pass that on to the newbies?
I think it's smart. I always think it's smart to actively listen to other generations and how they perceive art. And so in the 5 years me being here, I remember when I first got here that a certain style of like jazz was really popular. And then when the rise of K-pop started to happen, that like altered people's perception of dance and art, which was like really neat and fascinating here, or just like acknowledge, because my generation, I mean, I knew nothing of K-pop. A few of my friends did, but I
don't know what it is. What is it?
K-pop is like Korean pop culture.
Okay.
And so the dancing and entertainment aspect of a lot of the students, they're influenced by pop culture. And so I try to help let them know that their lived experiences is valid inside of the room. And so anytime we have techniques, we have dance days and lecture days, and on dance days I allow them to be as subjective as possible. And so for example, towards ballet, there may be people that are like, yes, I love this technique, I appreciated it. And then there's a person that may be like, this is too much coordination for me, I'm not fond of it, but I appreciate it. And so everybody on the same basis can appreciate it, but they can acknowledge, I don't have to like something to appreciate it. I can love something but not have a deep appreciation for it. And so knowing the difference between the two, which is really kind of rewarding, seeing the dance appreciation go from week 1, not knowing the La Ba movement or understanding how to read body language, to week 15, where they're now applying it to how can I read body language inside of my own career as a nursing major or as a teacher, and how could it help me to get a better grasp of who I'm communicating with.
That must be really gratifying for you, by the way.
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
I don't appreciate the struggle I'm going through, or, you know, I don't like the struggle I'm going through, but I appreciate how it's making me a better person, or
Right.
it's giving me the opportunity to learn this or that, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so it's that shared dialogue of, like, I always say that, yes, I'm teaching my students, but I'm also always learning from them. And I'm also always learning from peers. And so, well, I guess you can say in the arts is that beginner mindset. And so always being in the position of learning and actively listening versus saying, I'm the expert and I know everything. Because at the moment, I may know everything within this, like, 5 minutes, and then there's a new concept or a new idea or a new approach to something else, and I'm like, oh, there's something new, and I have to actively listen to this experience to get a little bit more of an insight of how I'm going to perceive it, or why am I perceiving it a different way. So, yeah.
This is a nice moment to kind of reflect back on our whole dialogue this morning, because I recall from earlier, almost an hour ago, how you said, I have to check in every once in a while to listen to the child within me. You know, that kind of newness, right? Of being open to new experiences and things like that. And that's part of appreciation too.
Yes.
You know, that kind of thing. But
We have to wrap it up.
But do you have any final questions to ask, or we have a few minutes left?
Just out of curiosity, because I know a lot of the times philosophy, well, in dance we borrow a lot of philosophy components. And what is your favorite like philosophy / art like combination books that you like to read or that you know of? I'm being a nerd. And
I can be quick on that one. I like Art as Experience from John Dewey.
I actually read that, yeah, and I'm actually going to reread it to see if I have the same experience from when I did in grad school to now. And so I always encourage people rereading what they read 5 years in the past, because they might have a different aesthetic experience to the material versus from when they did 5 or 10 years past. So I actually plan on rereading that, and I have that.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
You know, this
guy is, you opened up a can of worms.
Yeah, but I'm going to be really quick, and I'm going to be very subjective about this as well. You know, you were too. Dewey's your person, and you know who my person is, right?
Rosenzweig.
That's right. And so I wrote about this German Jewish philosopher who's a violin player, who in his main work that made him popular had at the very center of his work an interpretation of the Song of Songs.
Nice.
From the Bible, right? Which is like a really ancient dance song, you know, the dance of two lovers, right? So that's it in a very deep subjective level. You know, that's a kind of lived world experience that I refer back to, that we humans have been like dancing with each other for a long time.
Oh yeah, it's a part of who we are as human beings.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Thank you. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes,
I really
thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thank you. I really
Thank you. It's been
am
a
happy.
wonderful dialogue.
Yes, thank you for
pleasure.
thinking about me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our crew, our viewers. This has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera. Please join us next time.